This is News Conference Extra with Conan Nolan.
Good morning and welcome to News Conference special segment of Today in LA Weekend. Happy New Year. And as we take a look at 2016, we also are looking at some very important decisions due out from the U.S. Supreme Court over the next 12 months. Brian Kabateck is former president of the Consumer Attorneys of California, chairman of the board of directors for Loyola Law School. And Brian, thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year.
2016, Supreme Court has a number of cases. Let's talk about one that relates specifically to who gets counted in California to determine how many congressional seats we have, how many legislative seats. Right now, the census counts people, but this case relates to whether or not they should just count citizens, correct?
That's right. It's actually a Texas case. It came out of Texas, and the question being raised before the Supreme Court is whether you count legal citizens or even potentially legal voters for a census to determine the number of legislators or where the legislators come from. The impact of this could be to preclude Latinos, whether they're here legally or illegally, from a census count, which could skew the districts. And if it skews the districts, they could go considerably more Anglo in some areas. They could go more rural in some areas. And it'll have an effect on gerrymandering or setting up districts in states if the court rules that that's the right way to count it.
Democrats very much opposed. It would reduce the number of essentially diversity in some of these chambers of government.
Right, and once again, we see a real issue that's going to have an impact on Latinos and coming up also during an election year. So the Supreme Court's decision is wide-ranging. It's going to have a substantial impact.
Also out of Texas is an affirmative action case.
Once again, the Supreme Court's looking at a case that involves admission, in this case to law school, based on race, based on what the criteria is, whether it should be strict scrutiny, whether it should be more narrowly defined, and the Supreme Court is likely to reach a decision in that case this term.
There was a case out of Orange County that was challenging the California Teachers Association, which is the largest union in the state, one of the largest unions in the country. And it essentially is that by requiring me to pay dues that are then used for political campaigns for candidates I don't agree with, you violated my First Amendment. Do I have that?
That's absolutely right. It's a First Amendment case, and the Supreme Court is going to consider the question of whether or not those dues should be optional or mandatory as they are right now. And the effect of that case, if they rule that you can't, in violation of the First Amendment, you can't force dues on members, it could have an impact on considerable size unions like the Teachers Association.
In terms of political power, that would be huge because we're talking about the amount of money that they're able to bring together for political campaigns.
Right. They'd be no longer able to insist that their members contribute money. It would be voluntary. And a union like the Teachers Association, which in California is one of the largest unions, if not the largest union, most powerful union, would be severely impacted by it.
But would it impact not just their political war chest, but just the ability to represent people in the first place?
Well, not necessarily, because the union still could require dues for matters that have nothing to do with political. But there are a number of people that look at these unions and say, gee, your entire purpose is political, so it'll be a real question about where the dues would be cut back.
Well, some would suggest, how is it possible this has not been adjudicated yet? I mean, we've gotten to the point, the court has never rendered an opinion on something like this.
Court's never rendered an opinion on it. Of course, the makeup of the court hasn't been exactly like it is today or has been for the last few years. So now the courts are looking at issues like this, and this court in particular is going to make a decision on it.
In 2015, we've seen a lot of moving on from the Supreme Court. We've seen a lot of litigation, controversy over police shootings, police behavior. We had the hung jury in Baltimore. What do you see going forward based on what we've seen in 2015? Especially, it seems like there's more litigation involving police action than we've ever seen before.
You're going to have two substantial impacts as a result of this. One is you're going to start seeing a lot more civil lawsuits involving police shootings and police abuse type cases, and you're going to see juries start to find, they already are, for the so-called victim and against the police. You're also, I predict, going to start seeing more prosecution of police officers, something that rarely happens in California and the United States.
Take a look at the Porter Ranch natural gas leak, which continues. The fact of the matter is we have a series of lawsuits taking place now.
Well, there's going to be a explosion of litigation as a result of it. There already is. It is going to be, I believe, the single largest filing of lawsuits in the history of the state of California. You're going to see more lawsuits filed in Los Angeles County. They're going to ultimately be consolidated. They're going to be handled by one judge. My prediction is the court will probably assign a single judge to handle these on a long-term basis. So with that in mind, what you're going to see is a just massive number of lawsuits that are going to be filed.
California Fair Pay Act. Let's talk about that.
Goes into effect, is in effect now. It is the law of the state now. And what it simply holds is that you can't pay a female worker less money than her male counterpart gets. Sounds simple, isn't going to be simple. It's going to be hard to implement. There's going to be a lot of litigation over this, and notably, employers have to look out for this because it is going to be an explosion of litigation for the next few years.
But why?
Because it's amorphous. What exactly does it mean when it comes down to same or similar jobs, same or similar skills, same or similar training? And there's going to be a lot of give and take there to determine exactly what that means. It sounds simple on its face, but it isn't.
But the burden now is on the employer.
Burden's on the employer.
As opposed to the employee prior to this.
That's correct.
And therefore, some have suggested it's a recipe for full employment for attorneys.
Well, it's going to be a lot of lawsuits going to be filed over this. Whether they're going to be meritorious or not is to be seen. There's going to be Court of Appeal and Supreme Court decisions before this is over. And
finally, anything down the road that we're not looking at that's on your radar?
I think one of the most interesting things in the legal field is going to be what's going to happen at the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, with respect to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. A lot of people predicted for a long time that it's just a matter of months or years before she retires. I think she's going to retire at the end of this term. The term ends June 30th. The big question is going to be, is she going to retire in July or August where it will have a clear impact on the election, or will she retire after the November election and let the next president make the decision and keep it out of politics?
Brian Kabateck, attorney, one of the leading consumer attorneys in the state. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.